A 64 anni Charles Moore è uno dei giornalisti inglesi più famosi. È famosissimo per tre motivi. Prima di tutto ha diretto per anni tre giornali molto conosciuti nel Regno Unito, il Daily Telegraph, il Sunday Telegraph e lo Spectator. Il secondo motivo per cui è famoso è che è il biografo della Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher l'ha scelto appositamente come suo biografo. Charles Moore ha fatto un'opera veramente incredibile. Ha lavorato per 22 anni a questi 3 volumi di 3000 pagine, che sono praticamente la parola definitiva sulla legge di Ferro, con la quale dovrà confrontarsi chiunque voglia sapere o conoscere, ecco, il primo ministro britannico, forse più famoso della storia inglese, insieme a Churchill, direi. E il terzo motivo per cui Charles Moore è così famoso è che nel 1994 è passato alla Chiesa Cattolica. E, si sa che in Gran Bretagna le elite che studiano a Eton, a Oxford, a Cambridge, di solito appartengono alla Chiesa d'Inghilterra, che è la Chiesa di Stato inglese guidata dalla regina. E quindi fa sempre molto notizia quando un personaggio famoso, con la prima cugina della regina, la duchessa di Kent, e anche col primo ministro Tony Blair, passano dalla Chiesa di Stato inglese alla Chiesa cattolica. E Charles Moore ha fatto così nel 1994. Se conosco Charles Moore lo devo ad Avvenire, il quotidiano dei cattolici, perché è stato Avvenire che nel 1994 mi ha mandato a intervistarlo quando lui è diventato cattolico. E da allora lo conosco. Charles Moore è sempre stato gentilissimo con me, mi ha consentito di lavorare al Daily Telegraph, mi dà sempre delle interviste e adesso ha accettato anche di fare questa intervista. Charles, ti piace l'Italia? Do you like Italy?
People English have a love affair with Italy, and in my case that began when I was a boy in 1967, when I went to stay with Italian friends of my parents, Giovanni Malagodi, who lived in Tuscany and was an Italian politician. And ever since then, I've loved Italy. So that's more than 50 years, and I've been to Italy more than any other country.
What do you like about Italy?
Well, of course, we all admire the style and the food and the culture. And of course, if you have an English classical education, which I do, you're brought up to like very much both the Roman remains and civilization and the civilization of the Renaissance. So all those reasons are very important. And in my own case, of course, I was also interested for religious reasons. And I first visited Rome in 1978, I think. And, that was also a very important experience for me.
Did you meet the Pope?
Not on that occasion, but I did meet Pope John Paul II later. And I also met Pope Benedict before he became the Pope. And it was rather funny because Pope Benedict was at that time in charge of what I think you call the Holy Office. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I went to see him, to interview him about Pope John Paul II, who was still the Pope. And I brought with me something I'd written, an article I'd written about becoming a Catholic. And I thought I would give it to Cardinal Ratzinger, and he would just politely smile and put it away and probably forget about it. But instead, he sat down and he read the whole article before he spoke a word to me. So I was very frightened because I felt I was like a student and he was my professor reading the essay. And then we did the interview, and I never knew what he thought about the article. But anyway, he read very politely the whole thing.
Why did you become a Catholic?
Well, I was always a church-going Christian, and I was a member of the Church of England with my family. And in many ways, I like the Church of England. It's the long-established church of our country. But I came to the view, as many people have done, that it wasn't really the society that Jesus had intended. And in particular, I was influenced, as many English people are, by John Henry Newman, who has quite recently been made a saint, and his writings on this subject. I took a long time to think about this. When I first visited Rome, as I say, in 1978, I was already thinking about it, but it took me about 15 years or more before I did actually change, which was in the early 1990s.
What do you like about the Catholic Church?
Well, I suppose it doesn't matter very much what I like. It's more a question of what you believe, isn't it? But in terms of what I like the fact that it is Catholic in the sense of universal. So you can go to a Catholic church almost anywhere in the world. And I like the fact that it does not relate really to social hierarchy in the country. If you go to the Church of England, it remains the church of the monarch, and it represents a certain social stratification, so that poorer people are less likely to go to the Church of England. In a Catholic church, in most places, you have no idea who's going to be there. They could be every color, every age, every form of education, many different languages, and so on. And yet they would all be there together and equally. And I think that's an attractive and important part of it. I also like the way, one other thing I should say is, I like the way the priests do their job, because in the Church of England, a lot of the clergy are rather embarrassed because they don't really like talking about God. They find it hard to talk about. And in the Catholic Church, I think good priests are more like anybody who does a good trade, like being a carpenter or a fisherman. They just know what they're doing and they do it, and they're not so embarrassed. I like that.
The lockdown, is a very difficult time. Did your faith help you?
I hope so, but I found it very difficult not going to Mass. I watch the Mass on live streamed, but of course, sacramentally, that is not valid for somebody watching it. And so you feel as if you're looking through a glass door that you can't enter. So that is distressing. And I wish the church had done a bit more to see if we could receive the sacrament in some way. I realize it's very difficult, but I would have liked that. And I look forward very much to re-establishing the contact. I think it's very important to have the physical contact of the church and, of course, to receive the sacrament.
Why is it so important to have a physical relation with the sacrament?
Well, the sacrament is not the sacrament for you unless you have received it. So it has to be, as I understand it, as a channel of grace. You have actually to receive it. You can't just look at it being consecrated. I also think that the whole idea of the church comes from the Greek word ecclesia, meaning an assembly. So it has to be a real physical assembly of people, as well as, of course, a spiritual existence. And if you are deprived of the physical aspect, it is still the church, but it's very sad, and it creates a big distance between you and the church.
How did you pray during the lockdown?
Well, I pray in the same way, really, as I usually would with prayers in the evening and the morning. But I try to focus a little bit more on individuals I know who might be suffering. And in our church, we have a system which I think is good, in which those of us who are able-bodied and not isolating are given what is called a phone buddy, who tends to be an old person who can't go out and can't be visited. And so I ring my phone buddy every other day, and that is a form of practical action, if you like, or at least practical words in which you make sure that your phone buddy is all right. So I suppose that's a sort of extension of prayer in a way.
Your wife is a church warden in the Church of England. Is it difficult to belong to two different churches?
No, I don't, not very. It was a bit difficult at first, because I think my wife was thinking of becoming a Catholic, but decided not to. And, you know, of course, I respect her reasons. But I think it was a little bit painful at that time. But it's absolutely fine now. And of course, if you're not in the Church of England, you can like it better because you don't have to get annoyed by it. And of course, in England, most of the beautiful churches are Church of England, because they were taken from the Catholic Church at the Reformation. And so I like going to our village Church of England sometimes to see my wife's services, and sometimes just to drop in at the church and pray or something like that. And I find it a friendly relationship, and I don't think we have much tension about it.
You knew very well Margaret Thatcher, and you met her several times. Did you ever talk about religion?
Yes, yes, we did a bit. Mrs. Thatcher came from the Methodist Church, which, as you know, developed out of the Church of England in the 18th century because it wished to be more pure and more devoted to God. And she comes very much from that tradition. So it's a tradition of very close Bible study, very little ornament, very little liturgy, a great deal of concentration on the singing of hymns and the preaching of the gospel. And her political beliefs were very closely related to that, because she believed very strongly that you must preach the gospel. That is your duty. And she applied that to politics. And in a way, as a politician, she was a preacher. She was always saying, and she said this to me actually, there aren't many new messages, but you have to find new ways of putting the old truths. And she wished to preach what she thought was right in politics in a way that she learnt from Methodism.
What impact did her faith had on her career?
I think it made her strong, and it made her clear about what mattered. Her faith was not a very spiritual faith. I don't think she was very interested in mysticism or spirituality. And she wasn't interested in the structures of the church. So, for example, she was very pro-Catholic without wanting to be a Catholic. She just wasn't interested in denominations. But what she was interested in was the practice of virtue and the importance of a good social order. and she believed very strongly in the idea of the founder of Methodism, John Wesley, in the idea that your every moment was consecrated to God. The gift of time was very, very important, and you had to be grateful for that gift and fulfill the duty of using your time properly. And this is the reason why she worked unbelievably hard. And she found it very hard to understand people who didn't work unbelievably hard. She wasn't very good at understanding people who like, sitting around in a chair just having a chat. She would always want to get on and do things. And I think all this came out of, well, obviously it's her personal character, but it also came out of her Methodist background.
Do you know if she used to pray?
Yes, she attended. As I say, I don't think she was a very spiritual person, but she strongly believed in her duty to God, and she would attend, particularly in her old age, she attended church every Sunday in the church of the Chelsea Pensioners in London, which is a church for old soldiers. And they're very well known because they wear these very old-fashioned red uniforms. And she and her husband Dennis liked the military aspect and the traditional Anglican religion there. She sort of moved from Methodism to Anglicanism. For example, on the point about her prayer, you will remember that in 1984, the IRA, the Irish terrorists, blew up her party conference, and they killed some people in the conference, and they nearly killed her. And when she was moved out of the hotel that night when it had been blown up, she went to spend the night in the police station, and there she and her assistant prayed by the bed. And the following morning, the Catholic bishop and the Anglican bishop came and said prayers with her in the police station. So at the key moments of danger in her life, this would be particularly important.
You know Boris Johnson quite well because he worked for you as Brussels correspondent when you were editor of the Daily Telegraph. You talk about him. What is he like?
Well, Boris is not at all like Margaret Thatcher. He is a quite wild, very funny man who cannot be disciplined and does everything in his own special way. And of course, his own personal life has not reached the highest standards as would be prescribed by the church. He's a man of great intelligence and very quick perception. And I think that he's also, and in this respect, he is like Mrs. Thatcher, he's a great lover of freedom. So he's on the side of freedom and against too much government restriction. But Mrs. Thatcher liked him and he admired her, but of course they're utterly different people. And he's what in English we call a rogue. I'm not quite sure what you would say in Italian. And she, of course, was not a rogue.
Today is Prince Philip's birthday. He turns 99. Have you ever met him?
Yes, I have met him a few times. Yes.
Com'è? What is he like?
He has a very good sense of humor, and because he's an old sailor, it used to be in the Navy, he has an abrupt way of talking. So if he thinks you're saying something stupid, he'll just say, "That's a very stupid thing to say," or he'll be very direct. And he is not pompous. He's very interested in things, and he gets quite annoyed by lots of things that he thinks are done wrong. I think he's a man of great abilities, and I think it's been difficult for him, such an active man, that all through his life, since he left the Navy, he's had to be the second person to the Queen. But I think he handles it very well, and I think she, of course, has great trust in his advice. So I think the partnership works very well, but it is extraordinary. And of course, he is now so old that he was already world famous long before I was born.
Is he religious?
I don't really know about Prince Philip's religious beliefs, but he is a practicing member of the Church of England. Curiously enough, he was his mother. He had a most extraordinary upbringing. He didn't really have a nationality as a Prince of Greece, and his mother eventually became a Greek Orthodox nun, and lived for the last few years of her life in Buckingham Palace. She was a chain-smoking nun, which is probably rather unusual. And so he has the most remarkable background, but his own views are, I think, a traditional mainstream Protestant views.
Is Queen Elizabeth religious?
Yes, very clearly so. And I would say that she has devoted her life to giving a particular sort of Christian leadership. If you notice her Christmas broadcasts, for example, she always frames them in a Christian way. And I think it sounds a strange thing to say about a monarch, but in some ways, I think she tries to follow the idea of the which is in Isaiah in the Bible, of the suffering servant. I mean, of course, in a way, monarchs don't suffer; they're very well looked after. They live in castles and palaces, but the queen feels that she must always serve her people. And of course, remember, she's queen of 16 countries, so this is a global task. And that her whole life, which she vowed she would devote in 1947, when she was 21, she vowed that she would devote the whole of her life, whether it be long or short, she said, to this service. And of course, it's been very long, longer than any other British monarch in our history by a long way. And it has been a life of service. And she regards this as her Christian duty. And it's one of the reasons, I think, why she's so careful not to express views about public issues, because she feels that part of her Christian duty as monarch is to unite people and to try to see the best in people and to try to serve people rather than to lecture them. So she will set an example, but she won't preach at them. And I think that has been very powerful and is greatly respected. And of course, she is a faithful practitioner in the Church of England, attends every Sunday without fail, and has done so all her life.
In Italy, it's often said and written that the royal family plotted to have Princess Diana killed. What do you think?
I think it's complete rubbish and absolute nonsense. Well, what is the evidence? I mean, why would that happen? It's just absurd. It's one of these conspiracy theories, you know, that they happen. What was true, of course, was that the breakup of the marriage of the prince and princess was very distressing. She had a very difficult time. He had a very difficult time. She took up with this boyfriend, Dodi Fayed, and she was killed because of the very bad driving of Dodi Fayed's driver in Paris, and this was which was probably influenced by alcohol. He had alcohol. He had drunk alcohol, and this was a tragic thing.
In Italy, we had one of the harshest lockdown in the world. Do you think Italy did well? What do you think of it?
I'm afraid I wouldn't like to say very, very clearly because I don't know enough about it. What I do know is that the example of Italy was very influential in Britain, because Boris Johnson was hoping to take a more relaxed view of the situation. And then you had such a major crisis in northern Italy, in Lombardy and so on, that he felt he couldn't take that risk because the thing might explode and there might not be room in the hospitals. And so our policy was very guided by what had gone wrong and what had gone right in Italy. This remains the case. Of course, it's very controversial in Britain as to whether that was the right thing to do, but probably in the circumstances, he had to move fast, and in moving fast, he followed the example of Italy.
In one of your recent articles, you wrote about the fact that COVID-19 seems to affect a lot of bold men. Are you worried?
No, it's true that it does. But no, I'm not worried. I wrote it as a satire because we were all becoming very self-righteous about the Black Lives Matter campaign. And I felt that we needed to have a bit of a satire of this, because Black Lives Matter is not a representative organization for most black people. It's an extremely left-wing campaigning organization. And I felt that it was being indulged too much. And so I thought, let's pay attention to another group of people who've have some trouble with COVID. And according to various studies, we bald men are in big trouble.
Charles, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.